Hello, this is Chris Ferrara, and this is Fatima Perspectives, a series of commentaries on the state of the Church in light of the message of Fatima. The big story these days is, of course, the Pope's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si. Many people have problems with the encyclical. It has alienated many Catholics, Catholics of a traditionalist persuasion, Catholics of a more conservative persuasion who don't like what it says about capitalism, even though here, at least, it seems to me the encyclical is in line with social teaching in some of its criticisms. And the only people who really seem to be uniquely and uniformly full of praise for this encyclical are liberal commentators, even commentators from the far left, even atheists, even President Obama. People, accordingly, are wondering what they are to make of this encyclical. Here it might be useful to point out what the Pope can and cannot do in terms of binding the faithful in a teaching document. For those who are disturbed by the encyclical, it's necessary to remember, and this applies to people who are outside the Catholic Church and are concerned, that the Pope has the power to bind the faithful to propositions relating to faith and morals, not to his opinions on scientific matters or on technical economic matters, although the Pope is certainly entitled to teach on moral issues arising from human activity in the field of economics. When the Pope speaks on a matter of faith and morals that the Church has always taught, this is called the universal ordinary magisterium, the constant teaching of the Church, he speaks infallibly, because the Church cannot always have taught us something down through the centuries and be wrong about it. Furthermore, when the Church, speaking through the Pope, formally defines in very formal language, such as I declare, define, and pronounce to be a dogma of the faith, something that had previously been taught by the ordinary magisterium, takes it to the next level with the extraordinary magisterium by a definition of a dogma, such as the Immaculate Conception. Here, too, the Pope speaks infallibly. In other areas, in his opinions, his personal opinions on scientific matters, on political matters, on cultural matters, his informal statements at press conferences, his interviews with journalists, the Pope is just as prone to error as you and I. The Pope is infallible, in short, when he teaches what the Church has always and everywhere believed and taught. When he ventures some kind of novel opinion, he can make a mistake. And he will make a mistake, because outside of that narrow area of infallible teaching, the Pope is a human being like the rest of us. Which brings us to the issue of Laudato Si. One commentator says about this encyclical that it is, and I'm quoting, impressively expansive, covering environmental science, economics, international politics, carbon credits, social equity, technology, consumerism, social media, theology, and much more. Notice that theology is last in the list of subjects which are covered in this encyclical. And that should indicate that we have a problem here, because the Pope's competence lies in the area of theology, not in all these other subjects. Now, there are different branches of theology. There is sacred theology and moral theology. Moral theology covers matters of morality. Sacred theology covers matters of doctrine and dogma. Theology is the area in which the Pope, speaking as the vicar of Christ, his representative on earth, can and does teach infallibly when he teaches what the Church has always taught and believed. These other areas mentioned by this commentator are not areas in which the Pope has any assurance whatsoever of teaching infallibly, or for that matter, even reliably. If the Pope wants to give us an opinion on carbon credits or consumerism or other matters that involve particularities, factual contingencies, and so forth, he might well be giving us sound advice. Then again, he might well be erring in his opinions, because he's no more infallible in these areas than anybody else is. So, because there is something for everybody in this encyclical, that all or nothing proposition, something for everybody, opens up the Pope to the possibility of error. And I'm afraid to say that in this encyclical, there are areas where the Pope makes missteps and ventures opinions on such matters as climate change, in which we are perfectly free to disagree with him. So we are confronted with a problematical encyclical for that reason. Another area where the Pope can go wrong is when he makes vague prescriptions that really aren't tied to a particular doctrine or dogma of the faith, and therefore cannot bind us. And in this encyclical, we see many such pronouncements. We see, for example, the Pope calling for a, quote, new and universal solidarity, a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet, the chance of a new beginning, an authentic humanity calling for a new synthesis, a new integral and interdisciplinary approach, a new self-awareness capable of offering guidance and direction, a new start, and even, he says, a new way of thinking about human beings. What do any of these things mean? They mean everything and nothing. We certainly aren't bound to believe that we have to search for a new way of thinking about human beings. The Church has always taught us the way to think about human beings. We are creatures of God, endowed with immortal, rational souls. Our destiny is eternal. We are facing what the Church has always said are four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. These are the four things that matter most to each of us as individuals. Not searching for new interdisciplinary approaches, a new start, a new synthesis, or this, that, and the other thing in the realm of the temporal, the worldly, and the contingent. The commentator, John Allen, probably with some degree of irony, speaks of the Pope this way. And he's a fan of Pope Francis and his new approach to things. That Francis, he says, seems utterly unabashed about admitting mistakes, confessing ignorance, and acknowledging that he may have left himself open to misinterpretation. Pope Francis, writes John Allen, is embracing, quote, what one might dub his own dogma of fallibility. Now, there is a dogma of papal infallibility, which I've outlined for you at the beginning of this discussion, that the Pope speaks infallibly when he says what the Church has always said, and when he repeats what his predecessors have said, or when he defines as an infallible dogma what the Church has always taught and believed. In this case, as John Allen says, we're confronted with something quite the opposite, a kind of personal dogma of fallibility, where the Pope basically has decided to venture into areas where he is completely fallible, venturing opinions on things where he can be mistaken, venturing opinions on things where he might be flat out wrong, venturing opinions where he could be misinterpreted. A concrete example is something that was brought up during one of his press conferences on the return trip from Rome to Rome after his so-called liberation theology tour of Latin America. He was asked by a reporter, why do you always talk about the rich and the poor? What happened to the middle class? The great middle that works hard, tries to keep a roof over the family's head, put food on the table, that pays taxes, that runs the engine of most national economies. What happened to those people? And Francis replied, yes, this is something I should have been thinking about. I need to delve further into this magisterium, he said. He's basically said in this press conference, oops, I forgot to talk about a major portion of the economies of the world in my encyclical on economy and ecology. And this is an example of something quite alarming during the current state of affairs in the Church. A Pope who ventures into areas where he has no competence, who is willing to make mistakes, and it seems to be heedless of the consequences of the mistakes he makes for the credibility of the Church, has embraced, in fact, what John Allen rightly calls a dogma of fallibility. This idea of a fallible Pope who embraces fallibility and says whatever he thinks on given subjects has to figure in part of the great confusion in the Church that is prefigured in the message of Fatima, and in particular, the third secret of Fatima itself, whose integral text we have yet to see. For Fatima Perspectives, this is Chris Ferrara.